Today, I'm really excited to have Veeraj Mehta on the podcast. Veeraj is currently the co-founder of Puzzl, a payouts and operations platform for flexible workforces. Puzzl is backed by SF venture capitalists. Outside of Puzzl, Veeraj is also an angel investor. And prior to Puzzl, Veeraj founded Marketfly, a product studio which later got acquired. It was really great to have Veeraj on the podcast because we've seen how much remote work has changed the lives of people in the last couple of years. But I think we are still a couple years removed from seeing software that actually fully addresses the problems that this brings up. And so having Veeraj on the podcast discuss some of the work he's doing at Puzzl to help alleviate this was really interesting. So with that said, I hope you enjoy the podcast. Hey Veeraj, and welcome to the podcast.
Hey man, nice to be on here.
Yeah, super excited to have you on. But, before we get into the work that you're doing in Puzzl and some of the angel investments you made, I'd love to talk about what brought you to the world of entrepreneurship. And I know your story. I think you started pretty young, right?
Yeah, actually, as a kid, so my parents moved to California, or really to America, so that my dad could start his first business. He's a pharmacist, and he was working just for CVS. And eventually, he was like, "Screw this! I want to do my own thing. I don't believe in the way they do it. I think I can do it better. I think I can take care of patients better." And so, in 2009, he moved to California. He brought me and my brother out there, and ever since 2009, I've been at the back of his small little pharmacy in our small little town in SoCal, and I've just been working with him.
Right.
That inspired me to build a lot of my own things. I realized it's not as hard as people say it is. It's sort of just a jump that you need to make, and it's worth it at the end. He's happier, and I knew that that was something that I wanted to do. So that's sort of how I initially, decided I wanted to do that. So I worked on a ton of different projects during my time in high school. I'm only 20 right now, so when COVID sort of started, that's when I created my first official business where I was like, I need to start making some money. I started wanting things, as any high schooler does, and so I was like, all right, I'm gonna start making money, and that's also sort of where I decided to work with my co-founder today. Even she's the same story. Her dad's the same small business, and she had done a ton of projects, and we were like, all right, we'll come together. Let's create a company. Let's create an agency where we'll build stuff for anyone who wants it. Anyone who's going to pay us, we're going to build stuff for them. Anything from social media pages to actual products. And so that sort of was my first official start into making my first dollar.
Right.
Yeah,
Oh no, that's super interesting to hear, and I think it's really interesting when I ask this question because there's so many different paths.
yeah,
There's people whose parents have just working. Oh, sorry, I'm getting a little bit of interference. Can you? Uh, It just started. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Yeah. And I was just saying, yeah, it's just really interesting. When I ask this question, there's a lot of different responses I get. You have people whose parents have never even dreamed of doing entrepreneurship, right? They've just been working for a very long time. You have people who, like your dad, who have run a small business, and you saw, okay, this is how we can build a business, and you can naturally progress there. So always really interesting to see. But it's really cool that your co-founder and you both. You both have a similar background, and then you started that together. So really cool.
yeah. It's wild how similar our stories are. It makes us work together a lot better. Yeah.
Right. Right. That makes sense. Well, I know after that, so you started Marketfly. We'll get a little bit into that as well. But, one thing that was really interesting about you was that, you've gotten into the world of angel investing. And, that's something that I'm very interested in ultimately pursuing as well. So, when it comes to angel investing, it's very different than venture capital. So I was just wondering, for your own investment thesis per se, what are the different areas that you try to identify when you're trying to think about if you should invest or not?
Yeah, I guess my ideas are super the way I invest is quite simple. I either invest in people who I've been talking to recently, and I just when I talk to them, I feel a lot smarter because they're able to explain something that they're building in a way that anyone can understand, and that makes me know that they're gonna solve the problem well. Which leads into sort of my thesis is anyone who can make something complicated easy. That's sort of what I invest in. Any chance I
Right.
get, the investments I've made are a very clear example of that. I think too.
Right, right. That makes a lot of sense, and I think that's a pretty good investment thesis, honestly, because the most complicated problems, the most complicated ideas, when they get boiled down into something that's tangible for a lot of people, that's typically pretty well indicative of this startup can, have a lot of success. So that makes a lot of sense, and I think one investment in particular that was really interesting to me was Anja Health. And it's they're doing some really crazy stuff. So I'd love to like talk about first off what they're doing, and then what led you to ultimately investing in them.
Yeah, so they do cord blood banking. So when you're a child or when you're just born, they take the cord, the blood, and a few other materials like the placenta, and they store that in a really simple process. They're really kind of function like an e-commerce business. When you're pregnant, they send you a box, and this box is a something that you'll bring on the day that you're gonna go give birth, and the hospital can work with it quite easily. Put all the materials inside of this container, and they ship it out to Anja Health, and Anja Health has a lab where they take care of it. And the way that people did this previously was extremely complicated, and it was super super costly just because they wanted to use old school antiquated models of business. And she did it really well. She brought a SaaS like subscription to blood banking, which made it a lot more affordable. 80 100 bucks a month is a lot better than paying thousands of dollars up front. It's just not feasible
Right.
with the cost of birth already. And then she made it really easy to manage, right? If you need access to something, you should be able to just open your phone, ask for it. It should be a whole phone call, and it's such a just a big mess, right? And
Right.
with so much of modern e-commerce being so simple, I guess the question for her was, why couldn't I just bring it to uh, something that it could save lives, and it does every single year. And so my entire family is in like the medical business, and so when I first showed it to them, they wished for it. They didn't even keep my placenta or anything, and they were just like, it was just not a thought in our brains. But the fact that it's so easy makes it like a something that you must do if you're pregnant today. So I'm happy that she's able to do that for so many people now.
Yeah, that's wild. And I think, especially there's a lot of startups right now, like 23andMe and like just a lot of biotech startups in general. They're basically working on optimizing people live based on their DNA or, other like for example, on Jahel with, the placenta of the baby or of the mother. So anyway, there's a lot like that. It's a really interesting concept there. And, yeah, no, I mean, that's super exciting. So let's see how Anjahel does, but I'm sure they're going to succeed really well.
Yeah, yeah, they've been crushing it so far. So I'm wishing them the best.
Yeah, for sure. Well, cool. Well, we got into your experience a little bit, what brought you to entrepreneurship and your angel investments. So let's talk about Puzzle. But before we talk about Puzzle, actually, so you mentioned Marketfly, and I think one thing that was really interesting is that on LinkedIn, you mentioned that by the end of your time of running Marketfly, you uncovered a large and growing problem in the market. So I was just wondering what that problem was, and was there a specific moment where that sort of just dawned on you, or was it like a gradual, you gradually just looked around and you saw this opportunity showing up?
Yeah. So the Marketfly is that studio that I had mentioned, the agency that my co-founder and I had decided to build, and because we were just in high school, we didn't want to hire a bunch of W-2 employees. Mostly because the promise of a job wasn't fair to them. Because we were in high school, we could just shut it down tomorrow. But doing contractors on a project basis made it super easy because these folks, we would just add them on when we had a gig, pay them out once it was over. It was a really great process to scale and grow that business, which we did really really well and efficiently. And we believed in the idea very quickly that this is the best way we think business could function and could scale. But after just the first few months of us growing, my co-founder and I we were doing all the creative work initially and the product work, and our roles just completely changed over a few months to being admins and accountants and finance people. We were
Right.
managing the payouts, managing the reconciliation, the taxes, and we were just so astonished that it was so hard for people who we thought we were smart, so we thought we could get it, but we were just so amazed that our jobs could no longer be creative and we'd have to do this all day. And so initially we thought the problem was with the actual freelancers we were hiring. We thought the method that they were invoicing us was on, and so that's sort of what led into Puzzle. And so yeah, it wasn't an immediate like, oh, we have this great big idea that we should work on, but it was more like
Right.
there's some problem, we should go check it out and start working on it, which led us to eventually sell Marketplace as a whole.
Right. Right. That makes sense. And I think that it's also the timing that you guys started in, right? Like it was COVID. So this concept of freelancer is such a new concept, right? Like, I mean, it's been there for a long time, but the amount of freelancers and it actually being a viable career path for a lot of people and just the scale of it is completely new. So it makes sense that a lot of these issues, like you're mentioning, like actually, invoicing freelancers and managing their taxes and finances and all of that type of stuff is something that a lot of people haven't necessarily put a lot of thought into because typically before it was at a much smaller scale, so you can manage that with one or two freelancers. But when you have a whole team, it can really start scaling up. And nowadays freelancers are honestly the go-to for a lot of startups when you're bootstrapping or even as you grow. So That makes a lot of sense, and I think that's a really great market for Puzzle to get into.
That sort of leads that leads into what Puzzle is today. Sort of happened over the last over a year, I guess, is sort of how we got to where we are today. Initially, we were just doing that, what I mentioned, tools for freelancers and making it easy so that when the company got sent a Puzzle invoice, it was just easy, simple, nothing crazy, and they had their own taxes and everything was automated. Um, but today we're a little bit different from just a tool for freelancers, and I'm happy to sort of just jump into that too.
Sure, let's do it.
Yeah, so over the last year, early on, so we were hiring at some of these creative services, and that's the folks that I think most people think of when they close their eyes and think freelance. They think I'm going to go do design work, I'm going to do engineering work. What we very quickly realized is the people who need the most help with technology are not those folks. So we spent time doing it, and a lot of folks really like the solutions. A lot of folks didn't really care for the solution, and so we were, digging deeper into why that was true, and we realized it was just because they are tech savvy already. They already have solutions, or they all stitch something together, or they work with companies who are extremely tech savvy, right? Your average Google isn't really worrying about problems like this. They can't worry about problems, so they just build out their own tech. So we started talking to a few other folks, which eventually led us into a bunch of fields that make up a significant amount of this, something around 70 million sized freelance workforce today, and it's folks in medicine, manufacturing, trucking, logistics, e-commerce. We've seen and a whole bunch of antiquated industries that are still relying on things like checks, cash, even sometimes, or if they're really tech savvy, using something like Cash App, at best.
Right.
And you can only assume how many problems this would create when you think about the taxes that they have, the management of a workforce like this. Cash App isn't built for this, and checks are a relatively, if not the most horizontal type of payment that exists today. So,
Right, right. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I think no, it's really interesting, man. Like when I think about taxes, when I think about visas, for example, that was one of the ones I was fascinated about. It's just insane to me that like even now it's such an archaic system. Like you have to go onto the U.S. government website, go through like lines and lines of documents. You don't even know if those are the right documents that you're looking at, if it even caters for your situation. It is such a terrible process, and it's like everybody's making a startup to solve, one in problem. There's like 10 startups to solve one problem, in a problem in a field that, for frankly, has been pretty well thought out and solved. But nobody's really looking at these like issues, and I think we're starting to see that now. But at the same time, like it's like if you can make these complicated tasks easy, it is such an easy way to just bring people on board because it's such a big problem for so many people.
yeah, and that's why we think of building the solution as a vertical SaaS solution, and no other way, because we think if we can touch that very first point, which we are a little bit B2B today, we are actually heavily B2B in that we serve these freelancers by going to the companies that are hiring them first. So we'll go to maybe a nursing home that's hiring freelancers, or a flooring company that's hiring contractors, for example, or installers, and we'll go to these folks and deploy these tools to the freelancers via these companies. The companies are able to pay them out really seamlessly. And since we can hit that very first point of payment and of the work being created, we can also help them at the very end point, right? And that's how we built a really strong system of record, or we're building a really strong system of record, so that we could add these integrations and make every point of their life from start to end dead simple. So things like that tax that you mentioned, it's really easy for us to go ahead and file it on their behalf because it all ran through our system. So they don't have to worry about scattering through all their checks and systems and platforms just to pay their end of year taxes. But we make their lives easier and the company's lives easier.
For sure, yeah, and I think when I think a lot of people forget that like you focus on solving one of these issues, and then you slowly build the platform, and then like right now you're just focusing on the taxes and the payments, right, and then you can build that out to like the actual initial hiring or the end of the contract, the termination of the contract. Like you can really build out the platform, but it's really about first solving such a core issue, getting those customers on board, and then building your platform. And I think a lot of people end up missing that, where they try solving all the different issues that freelancing has, and then their whole product is just like a Frankenstein, right? Like they're not doing anything well. So definitely, I understand where the direction you guys are going, and it's great to see that you're getting clients on board.
Yeah, I 100% agree with what you said. Most people think that it's just a bunch of aggregated APIs to create a solution, and even though you might get somewhere up to some point, eventually the solution doesn't feel very magical and breaks.
Right.
So we like to take many leaps, not just tiny steps.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. Well, I think reaching out to those different areas or different employers is such a big part there, right? And I know you guys are, I guess, pretty small right now, still trying to find, I assume you find product market fit, but still trying to uh, really flesh out the platform. But when you think about growth, that's an essential part to company succeeding. So if everything works out and you guys are in this rapid growth phase, what do you think your big strategies are to showcase your value both to the market and to the freelancers that you're serving?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it comes down to actually building the most magical experience there is. Um, and that's like a really hard thing for most people to do. Very few companies have done it today. I'd
Yeah,
say like a few include like Apple, right? Everywhere you go, everything you touch, it just feels like it's good, ready, and done for you.
yeah,
It's something like that, and that's sort of like my investing thesis, right? When someone uses Onto Health, they don't even have to worry about something not working out just because it's going to be so simple. Um, and I think that's sort of what we want to do, and that's the best way to bring this value prop. We don't think it's by having the fastest growth early on and risking anything else, but we think we can catch up on a lot of things just by truly having the best product in the market, because that's what I think it comes down to at the end of the day. Uh,
right. Yeah, I think that's totally fair, man. And I think too many people think about, okay, how do I grow? How do I grow my product as soon as possible? And like, the product isn't ready; it's half baked. So even if you do grow it, if you have 100 customers come on, but 99 of them are leaving like after 3 weeks, 4 weeks, then there's no point, right? Like it's way better to have 20 customers come on or 10 customers come on and retain those 10 customers a month from now. Because that's still going to be more than what you're going to get with 100 customers and 99 of them leaving. So it's a huge part there.
yeah, there's definitely a balance.
Yep, for sure, man. And I think, one of the interesting parts about your experience there is that, you're also an investor, right? So you have insight into what signs, may signify that a company can succeed and what makes it prime for success. So, when it comes to when it comes to like Puzzle, what do you think other investors should see within the company that you think makes it prime for success, or just in general? Like, what do you think makes it prime for success?
Yeah, I think people should, when they're looking at the company, they focus so much on the present, on what value of what they're seeing, and that rarely makes sense when you're looking at early stage investing. Usually, everything's in a shithole. Nothing's actually working out. It's about getting there. Um,
Yeah,
so I think the best investors I've ever seen, they really focus on the journey. They focus on you as a person instead of just like what do I see today? Okay, there's not enough MRR or ARR, and they don't expect it to go anywhere past that. And I totally understand both sides. The data-driven VCs do well too, but I think it comes down to the people and also what they've done so far to try to get to success. So I think for us specifically, a lot of the VCs mention our product building skills and our skills to iterate. We've gone from to we haven't done like a massive pivot or anything, but we've gone through so many micro pivots and learned so much
yeah.
so fast that I think that's sort of our key indicator of success, that we sort of are pretty resilient. We don't just like think of an idea, think we're so right, and just go along with it and waste a bunch of money. We try to prove out what makes sense in this market, and we'll be very honest if we say that this didn't work out, but this shows some possibility of working on it, and then we'll go attack that. Yeah,
Right. Right. No, that makes a lot of sense. And I think, actually, on like a related note, I think one of the biggest issues I've seen with people who've gone from like FANG backgrounds or like big tech backgrounds to becoming founders is that inability to pivot because they're so founded on their idea. And when you're at a bigger company, even as a product manager, right, a lot of the times those ideas can be validated with so many users in the market, but when you have a startup, you don't have those users necessarily. You have to go talk to customers and build your platform, but you can't necessarily just do A/B testing and deploy a feature and then get instant feedback. And I think the ability to not only talk with customers in a whole different manner than you would have at a bigger company, but also be able to take advice and be able to juggle like, hey, this makes sense. Maybe we should pivot in this way. But at the same time, sometimes you have to step back and be like, no, I don't. I think we should still like stick with our laurels. So that's like a very acquired skill. I feel like that you get by building companies. So I mean, that definitely, like, with your guys' experience, it makes a lot of sense that you already have that. But I definitely think it's very interesting when you look at people with your background versus somebody from a bigger tech company. I think people who aren't in tech will usually think like, oh, the guy from the big tech company should be the one succeeding, but that's not necessarily the case, right? And that's what makes tech so interesting, and specifically startups.
yeah, no, we don't hire from big tech for a reason. We hire young, gritty people that don't really have any pretense on how A/B testing works or how enterprise sales should happen. Right? Meta has people approaching them, so sales is quite easy. But when you don't have anyone just walking up to your front door, things are very very different. So we like to train from like the ground up.
Yeah, for sure. No, it's very different when you're like, hey, I'm representing Meta or I'm representing Apple versus, hey, I'm representing a 5-person startup. You want to buy our product, right? So it's a vast difference, and I think a lot of the podcasts I hear outside of this one, of course, a lot of the great sales leaders, that's what they talk about. That people who are from non-traditional backgrounds, typically the backgrounds you wouldn't think would necessarily succeed in sales, actually do really well because they have different ways of bringing customers on that they haven't necessarily seen in the past. And there's not really that expectation that, hey, I have this name brand behind me, I can sell anything, right? It's more like, hey, this is my variables. How do I find a solution here when I'm talking to this customer or potential customer? So very interesting.
Yeah, no, 100%. That's sort of my co-founder leads sales at Puzzle, and so she's very unique because she understands her audience. She understands that they don't exist on LinkedIn as most customers you think would. They don't exist online. They are in the middle of their office on the on the bay managing a shipping hall, right? So the
Yeah.
best way to approach them is bringing donuts to their office, walking in and shaking their hand, right? Nothing else really works, and she does that really well. She does that every day, every weekend. She's a grinder like that. So that idea of building sales that way didn't happen because she worked at a big tech company, but because she had no other idea on how to approach these folks.
Yeah, for sure. No, and that's such a, it's great to hear that's like that type of sales even works in 2023 because I think most people are like, ah, yeah, just get on a call, get on a Zoom meeting. But in my opinion, nothing beats meeting somebody in person, talking to them, shaking their hand. I think that connection is just another level. And I think if you're in sales long enough, you realize that if I had the choice of being in person and doing that, it's probably the way to go.
Yeah, 100%. It does work much, much better.
Right, right. And I think one thing that with Puzzle is the integrations of technologies that people already use. And I think when we think about integrating technology, it's essential on a lot of products, especially for early stage startups. Everybody has their established products and their own ecosystems that they're part of, so you want to try leveraging that when you're building your own product. But sometimes it can be really tough to balance that, right? Because you have all these different services, some overlapping, and you also want to make sure that you have your own value on the product itself, and that doesn't just come from the integration. So when you think about the integrations in your product, how do you go about keeping it cohesive and making sure that it doesn't just become a whole mess?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the best way to do it is just by asking the actual customers, what are you using and what do you want? I think most people, what they do is they just are like, okay, like people need accounting sync, right? Because there's payments they need accounting sync, so they'll add like 50 different accounting softwares, which is always an issue. So that's like a part of the problem. But I say in general, everything happens just because people don't want to talk to their users and find out what they need. And I'd say that's why even when we win a sale over another potential competitor, it's just because that competitor was obviously not thinking about their use case, not thinking about what software those companies use, but rather just like one of the most popular generic softwares like Google Drive or Gmail, but not like anything that's like industry specific. So talk to your customers for anything integrations related because there won't be anything to integrate if they're not using it.
Yeah, it's funny on a related note, actually, it just reminds me of like, whenever I talk to people about this, they always bring up this quote from Steve Jobs that, oh, the customer doesn't really know what they want. And I'm like, I get it. Like I get what Steve Jobs is saying, but you have to have a certain level of like you have to be at a certain level of understanding your customer to say that statement and to actually like be able to succeed with it. And whenever people bring that up, especially with early stage startups, I'm like, that's like you can't say that in your situation because you need to really understand your customer. And unless like you have like years of experience, it's such an interesting dynamic there. I don't know.
Yeah, no, it's true. The Steve Jobs thing, it does make a lot of sense, and I'd say that it makes more sense when the customer doesn't understand what can be built versus what they need. Like they might not understand how fintech infrastructure works, right? Like your average human does not understand that, so they cannot tell you what they want. They might tell you that they wish they had a faster way to send checks, but if you tell them there's a way that checks don't need to exist, that's what you should be presenting. And I think that Steve Jobs quote makes a lot of sense. But you telling them that Bitcoin is the answer versus cash is the or it's some other version of payments doesn't. It's not really what. Uh, I don't think that really makes sense though.
Well, That's been my problem with a lot of crypto companies lately, because, or not lately, but especially back in the day, where it's like, oh, use crypto for this, but you're not actually giving the benefit. Like, you're not actually telling what the benefit is to the customer. They don't know, right? It's just crypto, and that's all they see, which doesn't make any sense for most people. Yeah, man. So
Yeah,
anyway, no, well, it was a great conversation, man. Really enjoyed talking about Puzzle, some of your angel investments. And before I let you go, because I know you're pretty busy, I have two last questions. With the first one
yeah,
being, is there a book or like a podcast or something that you recommend us checking out?
yeah. You guys should check out this podcast. You did a great job interviewing me, so thanks for having me on. Book. Okay, this is a good one. There's a book called The Winner Effect. It sort of just entails, how to use that momentum of small wins to get to bigger wins, and it really helps someone. I think losing sometimes or not doing as good can sometimes make you work a little slower. It always does. So that book does a really good job of helping you build momentum to sort of get that big swing. So that's a great book.
Okay, awesome, man. And the last question that I have is, what's the next steps for you in Puzzle? What can we look forward to?
Yeah, we are about to go live with a few customers, and we're going to release some pretty awesome case studies with them. So I think we're finally going to prove out what we've been working on for the last year. So it's sort of a big deal for us. We're going to raise some additional funding at the end of this year, throughout this year, and next year. So there's a lot of steps ahead, and we're probably going to hire a ton. We're a super small team. If anyone wants to know, we're 3 people. We've been building this with just 3 folks, doing everything with us. So we're going to be hopefully around 10 people by next year. So definitely check us out. We're going to be needing some help.
Awesome, man. Well, yeah, I'll leave a link to Puzzle and to your profile. So if anybody wants to reach out to you, feel free to
Yeah,
do that. But super excited to see where you guys go. I'm sure in a year we're gonna have maybe you'll come back, or we'll just grab a coffee or something, and I'll get to hear all about it. So super excited for that.
100%, man. Let's do it.
Well, thank you so much, guys, for listening. And until the next one, take care.